Well, the offseason is officially here. I mean, the regular season ended on Saturday, so the games are finished. The regular season games are finished at least. Still waiting on that bowl destination that we'll find out, I would presume, on Sunday. But the offseason is officially here, and we know that because players are going into the transfer portal and recruits are decommitting and flipping leading up to signing day. Yes, it's the annual attrition period, really, is what this is. This is a period of attrition here in the early going right after the regular season ends. The transfer portal doesn't officially open for undergraduates until next Monday. But kids who have already graduated, or I think if your coach leaves, you can go into the portal earlier than that. And we're seeing that happen this week. Guys either going into the transfer portal officially or announcing their intentions to enter the transfer portal. And so you're seeing a lot of attrition all over the country. And certainly that's the case with Pitt. Somebody asked on the message boards, we're seeing all these departures. What about additions? Do you think Pitt will add any transfers? Yes, they're going to add transfers. They're going to add a lot of transfers. They'll probably add somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 transfers this offseason. Well, I don't know. That feels like a big number, but I think that's right around what they added last year. So they'll add a bunch. They'll lose a bunch. But the thing is, you lose them first, right? Guys have to go into the transfer portal first before you can start getting them. Not necessarily, I don't necessarily mean Pitt needs to lose transfers before they can add them, but in order for Pitt to add transfers, other schools have to lose their transfers. It makes sense? So all you're going to see right now is guys leaving, and it's going to feel like it's a big bummer. It's going to feel like nobody wants to be part of this sinking ship that lost 5 games in a row. Who would want to be part of this football program at this point? Well, it's not that. The reality is, and I'm sure we'll see, by next Monday, we'll see, look at this. Pitt's already lost like a dozen guys and they haven't added a single transfer. Well, that's how the timeline works. You lose transfers and then you get them. And chances are you'll lose a bunch before you start adding them because everybody else has to lose a bunch in order for you to have options to choose from. Make sense? And so we're in that period now of attrition. And every day we're going to see a handful of guys from Pitt go into the transfer portal. And some of them are going to be guys that just aren't getting much playing time. Some of them are going to be guys who slipped down the depth chart and got passed by younger players on the 2 deep. And some of them are going to be guys who are on the 2 deep, maybe even starters, players you would rather not lose. I think it's important to come to grips with this before we really dive headlong into it. Pitt has 3 players so far, as of this taping last night. 3 players so far who've announced that they're going into the transfer portal. That number is going to grow. Those 3, this is the point I was going to make. Those 3 are down the depth chart guys. Not starters. There will be starters. There will be starters who go. I'll be shocked if we don't see at least a couple of guys who will be pretty much locked into starting roles next season opt to go into the transfer portal. We saw it last year, and it was a major shock and unbelievable. How could Solomon DeShields go and Dayon Hayes go? Well, now we should know that this is what happens. Now we should be comfortable with this and understand it as just part of the process because there are other schools out there that are going to like some of these guys, and they're going to end up enticing them into the portal with a nice big NIL offer. And ultimately, there's a decent number of schools in the country who can outspend Pitt. And I think it's important to understand this from the get-go. And I think Pitt can be very competitive with what it offers in NIL. I think it can make substantial offers to guys, competitive offers to guys, the kind of money that is more than a lot of college students have access to. But there are going to be other schools that can offer more. I think with Pitt, what you're always looking to do is get close enough. I mean, if you have the opportunity for a high priority target to outbid other schools, you should do it. But for the most part, if it's you versus a school that definitely has a bigger NIL budget than you or bigger NIL war chest, then you need to be close enough to be able to say, this is a significant chunk of money, and you can stay here, continue developing in the same system, either the offense or defense you've been working in, with the coaches you've been working with, and the relationships you have, and the place that you've come to know as home. You have to get close enough. And if I've said this once, I've said it at least like a couple dozen times. Most of the guys that Pitt is able to retain and most of the transfers they're able to bring in, like high priority guys, good players where there's competition for their services, chances are Pitt's going to need a hometown discount. I think that's what they got in order to bring back a number of guys last year. I think some of the guys you look at who came back who probably had other options, Gavin Bartholomew, Rodney Hammond, Kenny Johnson, Dayon Hayes before he decided not to come back. They got these guys. I don't want to say they got them at a discount, but those guys, Bartholomew, Johnson, they could have gotten more money elsewhere. That's as close to a concrete full fact as I can, come up with without citing a specific example. But Pitt was able to get close enough on the NIL side, and that it was close enough that it was worth it to stay with the coaches, even though it was a new staff for the offensive guys, but in a place with a head coach and a system and just sort of a program that the money was close enough. And so that's what Pitt is going to have to do with its top priority guys here. And there's a number of them, and we'll break them down on Panther-Lair.com today, of the priority guys to hold on to in this transfer portal window. But for the most part, if there's a good player and their number one and the number one priority for them is they're looking and saying what dollar number is the biggest, chances are they're going to leave. And it's just the reality of it. And that's not just a reality for Pitt. That's a reality for a lot of schools across the country. So the guys we're going to talk about today, not necessarily guys who are going out to chase the bag. They're probably looking to get a better opportunity than what they felt like they were getting at Pitt. But there will be those guys who are chasing the bag, as they say. I don't think that'll be a majority of the transfers who leave. That wasn't the case last year. Last year you lost Dayon Hayes, Sam Okunlola, Solomon DeShields, DeAndre Jules. It's maybe like 4 guys who were probably pretty locked into starting jobs, and you would really rather not lose. You would have liked to have held on to them, and they ended up going somewhere else for more money. And later this week, we'll recap how all those guys did, kind of take a look at the transfers who left. But there were those guys, but that was not the majority of the 20 or so scholarship guys who left Pitt via the transfer portal last year. It was a small minority. It was 4 out of 20. The majority of guys who left were guys who were looking for a better opportunity, more playing time, and maybe even transferring down a level to get a better chance to play. That'll be the case again this year. They'll lose a bunch of guys. A bunch of guys will go to the transfer portal. A handful of them will be guys you don't want to lose, and then the rest will be players who just want an opportunity to play. And that's the case with the 3 guys who have announced so far that they're going into the transfer portal. So today, as we move into this, the period in the calendar where there's a lot of personnel movement, we're going to talk about those 3 guys who are going. 3 players who've announced they're going into the transfer portal, plus a decommitment from Pitt, one that we kind of saw coming over the last few days. And it came to fruition yesterday. With signing day tomorrow, it's pretty notable that they lost a commitment from the 2025 recruiting class. Where does that leave Pitt's class? And where do the Panthers stand heading into signing day? So we're all talking about attrition, transfers leaving, decommitments. It's not all negative. It's just part of, it's the circle of life. It's the path unwinding. And that's what we'll talk about here on the Morning Pitt, the Tuesday edition on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, you might say, wow, that was a really long intro. You didn't even talk about the 3 guys who've gone into the transfer portal yet. And I understand that, but, I felt like it was important to sort of set the stage of what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be, experiencing, looking at, following, reporting on, thinking about, talking about over the next couple of weeks. And I know it's not going to matter. I know that every time somebody goes into the transfer portal, there's going to be a half dozen tweets that say, well, this is what happens when you lose 5 games in a row. But no. That's not it. But it's okay. But it's not it. And so I was hoping we could sort of set the table and get the conversation on track here on a Tuesday morning. But chances are we'll have this conversation a bunch more times because I just think you have to accept a certain reality of what college sports is right now. Yeah, and it's been this way for 2 or 3 years now. And I think you have to accept it and understand it. Guys are going to transfer. They're going to transfer for more money. And schools are going to entice them into the transfer portal with big offers of money. Like all the things that are happening, like all the things that are you might joke like, well, this illegal thing's happening, that illegal thing. No, they're all happening. It's all very much real. Every worst like sort of suspicion you have like of, a young player has a great start to a season and other schools start reaching out through back channels saying, hey man, you should stop playing now. You should redshirt and we will get you paid. You transfer here, save your year of eligibility. Like that's happening. That's real. I mean, it's shady and wrong on so many levels. But there's no real rules. Nothing is being enforced. So these are the things that are happening. So I think it's important to understand, again, to understand what this sport is right now and what it's become and probably what it's going to be for a little while till they find a way to regulate it and really organize it. But I digress. For Pitt, it means 3 transfers so far, at least as of this taping last night. If more came out at like 11 o'clock last night, I apologize. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Well, we probably won't because tomorrow's signing day. We'll talk about signing day stuff tomorrow. But 3 announcements. The first one was Nikai Johnson. He actually announced on, what day was it? Like Thursday or something? On Thanksgiving, maybe? Was Thanksgiving the 28th? So he actually announced before the final game, before the game at Boston College, he announced he was going into the portal. He only played 7 snaps at Louisville. Nikai Johnson, a 4-star defensive end out of Steel Valley. Back in the recruiting class of 2021, came into Pitt with a lot of hype. There was a lot of excitement. He was a very early commitment for Pitt, and there was a lot of hype and excitement around him. Penn State was trying to get him off his Pitt commitment, get him to flip from his Pitt commitment late in the process, and he stayed with Pitt. Didn't play a whole lot through his first 3 seasons. This past year, he moved inside to defensive tackle, played a lot, started 4 games, still didn't produce a whole lot. That's the defensive end production. I thought I had that written down, but didn't produce a whole lot in his Pitt career over the course of those 4 seasons. 23 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and 1 sack for Nikai Johnson. There was a feeling that him moving inside to defensive tackle was going to be a real positive for him and give him a chance to really flourish. It didn't really take this year, and I think he could see the emergence of some of the younger guys. Francis Brew, Jasir Whittington, there's Nick James, there's Sean Fitzsimmons, there's Isaiah Neal, and Nikai Johnson might have felt like he was getting squeezed a little bit. Like I said, he only played 7 snaps on defense at Louisville and was gone the following Thursday. Went into the transfer portal. He's got 1 year of eligibility left, and wish him the best. Maybe the best opportunity is to transfer down a level and see if he can get some playing time there. And then yesterday there were 2 announcements. Terrence Moore, the offensive lineman, announced that he was going into the transfer portal. Moore started 9 games last year at center, and I thought he was going to be the starting center coming into this season. He was the incumbent starting center, but they added Lenny Cooper out of the transfer portal, kid from NC State. I thought there was a chance that what you would end up seeing was Moore as the center and Cooper as the guard, and they both will be in the starting lineup. What ended up happening was Lenny Cooper worked at center the whole time and beat Terrence Moore for the job. Moore did end up making 1 start this season. I think the Louisville game when Cooper was out with an injury, but it was pretty clear he was behind Cooper. I thought Moore did a decent job as the starter in 2023, but it didn't seem like the coaches felt great about his performance this year. And so it didn't seem like he was going to pass Cooper for that starting job. So Terrence Moore, with 1 year of eligibility left, went looking for is looking for another home. Another guy who graduated. He's done with college. He put in his time, got his degree, and he's going to look for somewhere to play for his final year of eligibility. And then the other guy was Noah Bigelow, another redshirt junior, another guy who graduated. Noah Bigelow is a corner. Never, spent his first 3 years playing behind Marquez Williams, MJ Devonshire, AJ Woods, those guys. But when those guys were finally gone in 2024, he never really made that jump into the 2 deep. He only played 55 defensive snaps in 5 games this season. Just never really made a big impact. He was behind Rylan Gandy, he was behind Rashad Battle, he was behind Tamon Lynham, and ultimately he was behind Tamarian Crumpley, who I think was in the same 2021 recruiting class as Bigelow. And so I think if you're Noah Bigelow, you look at it and you're like, well, I think Gandy, Battle, Lynham, and Crumpley are all coming back. They were ahead of me this year. I'm not sure if I'm going to get ahead of them next year. And so he goes into the portal looking for a new home, better opportunity with, like Johnson and Moore with 1 year of eligibility remaining. Now, I think in all those situations, I just listed out all the depth at cornerback, those 4 guys returning, plus some young players, promising young players in Shadarian Harrison and Jeremiah Anglin. Same thing at defensive tackle, all those guys coming back, Nick James, Sean Fitzsimmons, Isaiah Neal, Jasir Whittington, Francis Brew. A lot of talent, a lot of returning talent at defensive tackle. Offensive line, Lenny Cooper is due back, so you think he resumes that center position. I don't know who the backup center would be next year. They'll have to move someone into that spot and learn to snap and all of those things. But I think these are 3 guys who just saw their position on the depth chart and decided they wanted a better opportunity. Decided or felt like they weren't going to get that opportunity at Pitt next year in their final year of eligibility, and they wanted a chance to go play. And I can't fault them for that. I really can't fault these guys for saying, I want a chance to play. I'm looking at the situation, I'm sizing it up realistically, and I'm not going to get on the field here. And I'd like to work for it or whatever, but it's probably not going to happen. So I'm going to go find somewhere where I can play. And maybe it's another Power 5 school, maybe it's a G5 school, maybe it's an FCS school, wherever it is. And I hope they find that opportunity. This is kind of, I think this is like, I don't want to say this is what transfers are supposed to be, but this is a good use of the transfer portal. Guys who only have a year left, want to get a chance to play, and they want to go find somewhere they can play. And we saw guys do this last year. You know what I mean? You saw Aiden Henningham went in the transfer portal, ended up at Albany State, which is in Georgia, and played and started all year and had a good year for them. At least the last time I checked, which was probably a few weeks ago. That's good. He wasn't going to get on the field here. He was down the depth chart, didn't like his position, wanted a chance to play. I think that's fine. Everybody's entitled to transfer for whatever reason they want, but you look at these situations, you're like, okay, that makes sense. I get it. I get why they're going. And it makes, it's understandable. So those are 3 transfers off the scholarship board. 3 guys who will not be returning next year unless they pull a Brandon George and Nate Temple and do come back, which I'm guessing won't be the case. I think you'll see very few of those. I'm surprised that we even saw any of those to begin with. But then the recruiting class took a hit yesterday as well. Demarion Folks, wide receiver prospect from Good Counsel in Maryland, took an official visit to Missouri. Got an offer from Missouri last week. Scheduled an official visit to Missouri over the weekend. Went and visited the Tigers, and yesterday announced that he was flipping his commitment from Pitt to Missouri. Folks committed to Pitt over the summer. Was June commitment, that kind of thing, and looked like a really good prospect. Looked like he was going to be a really good receiver prospect. Had a great senior season at Good Counsel. Obviously earned some offers last week. And signing day is a lot sooner this year, but this part seems to have carried over from previous years of schools trying to flip other schools' commitments in the last week or so before signing day. Folks was the main target here. And ended up flipping to Missouri, where there's probably a significant NIL offer waiting for him, and that's that. If that's what the main decision is going to come down to, then that's what it ends up being. It's a blow to the recruiting class because I think Demarion Folks is a good player. I think he's a talented receiver who'd be a nice fit in this offense. He's also like a 5'9" slot receiver, a very good 5'9" slot receiver, but he's a 5'9" slot receiver, and I think Pitt's got guys like that. I think you look at guys they've brought in over the last year or two in the recruiting class. You can look at the current recruiting class even without Demarion Folks, where Tony Kinsler and Bryce Yates are both wide receiver commits who are going to sign with Pitt tomorrow. Neither one of them is necessarily big. I think it would have benefited Pitt to have Demarion Folks on the roster because he's a talented, fast playmaker. But if I'm looking at a type of receiver they need to add, they need a little more size. I don't think they have a problem finding 5'9", 5'10" fast receivers. They've got those guys, and they're bringing more in, and they'll probably always do well recruiting those kinds of guys. they need a little bit of size, and I think they'll look to the transfer portal for that. I think they should look to the transfer portal for that. I think, I wrote an article on Panther-Lair.com yesterday about the transfer portal priorities: offensive line, defensive end. I mentioned wide receiver, but like sort of specifically a veteran wide receiver with size, I think is what they really need. And that's not what Folks was going to bring. Folks was going to bring, again, talent, speed, playmaking ability, explosiveness, and all those things are good to have, but I think they've got those things on the roster and in the recruiting class, and I think they can get more of that from the transfer portal if they want more of that. For 2025, I think they need at least one big receiver with experience out of the portal. So it's a blow to the recruiting class because he's a talented player. It'd be better to have him in the recruiting class than to lose him, but it's also not the end of the world. As our good friend Chris46 would say, Pitt will be fine without Demarion Folks. So shout out to you. Chris's dude's named Chris have to stick together. So that's where things stand right now. 3 transfers out, 1 decommitment from the recruiting class. Rest of the roster still intact. Rest of the recruiting class still intact. Of course, Folks is the second decommitment. Elijah Dotson decommitted a week or two ago, whenever it was, flipped to Michigan, which again, it happens. And I think that's a position group at defensive back where they're relatively solid. I think they'll be okay there. But we'll see what the rest of the week brings. Signing days tomorrow. I expect the rest of the recruiting class all to be signed, sealed, and delivered. And then we'll see what transfers leave the team over the next week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Transfer portal window officially opens for undergraduates on Monday, but guys can announce now if they want. They're not going to be officially in for the undergrads, but they can make their announcements now. So we'll be keeping an eye out on that. We'll be covering it all at Panther-Lair.com, and we will be talking about it right here on the Morning Pitt and on our weekly live show. So look, here's what we got going on tomorrow. For signing day, we got the Morning Pitt in the morning. We're going to get a live stream going at 10 a.m. So we'll have that for you. We'll kind of recap all the signings to that point and talk about what stands out about the recruiting class, what we think, what we like. Get your comments and questions. We'll have a little conversation about it. I'm sure we'll talk to Pat Narduzzi later in the day. And then we'll have the Panther-Lair show tomorrow night at 8:30 right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Me and Jim Hammett will get together, talk a little Pitt sports with you, talk about the recruiting class, the transfers, the season, basketball, everything going on. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt conversation tomorrow night, or the Morning Pitt, or the live stream tomorrow, whatever it is that we may do. You don't want to miss any of it. So make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications. You get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for tuning in today. I hope your week's gotten off to a great start. I hope you have a great Tuesday. Tomorrow's signing day. Can't wait for that. Like and subscribe. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.